We're back live tonight here on In Focus. Let's get further analysis now, the IFP Policy Conference. And we're joined now by political analyst Dr. Fikile Vilakazi. Dr. Vilakazi, good to have you. Thank you very much for your time. How do you think it would go down with, close to 2 million grant beneficiaries in KwaZulu-Natal alone? Would hear that Inkatha Freedom Party does not necessarily believe in a socialist state.
Good evening, Thabo, and to viewers at home. Inkatha Freedom Party is a unique political party. You know, we know that over time, since 1994, they have been very clear about policies around self-reliance. So one of the things that they're promoting is a citizenry that is capable, that is able to take care of itself. So they wouldn't support policies like your social grants in the manner that we are seeing it now, what we're calling social assistance. But they would rather, in terms of my reading of their policies, support an arrangement where citizens take care of themselves, either, I would imagine, through entrepreneurship programs or self-generated reliance programs, in terms of survival, but not necessarily depending on handouts. So I imagine, under Inkatha Freedom Party government, if they become government, we probably are going to move away from a social assistance program as we know it today in South Africa under the government of the ANC. And of course, that is a major policy shift, a major, different policy direction compared to what South Africa has known. But I mean, there are many scholars and thinkers who are advocating along those lines to say that, social assistance is not necessarily a mechanism that is assisting a country like ourselves, where we have high levels of poverty and unemployment, to be a developing country towards a better life for all. Perhaps the Inkatha Freedom Party, if given an opportunity, may show us something different. Maybe we need to look closer to Ulundi, which is at least one particular municipality where they've been governing over time, right? They have a lot of popularity and leadership in Ulundi, the kinds of things that they've done. And maybe we can measure their ability and capability in terms of that policy, whether it can be successful and replicated elsewhere in South Africa. One would need to look at whether the people of Ulundi have reduced poverty rates, what is the level of employment in Ulundi, what is the level of development around issues of housing, accessibility to services, because that is where they've governed. And that is how I would propose that maybe we need to look at Ulundi to see whether that's the kind of an arrangement that South Africa will enjoy under Inkatha Freedom Party and assess for ourselves whether we'll be happy with that kind of a thing. But I will imagine, Thabo, to answer your question, that Inkatha Freedom Party definitely would not support an arrangement like we have, which is what we are calling social grants. But I think we will have something different under their leadership and governance.
While we look at that and where they are governing now, I mean, they're speaking of a concept where they are enabling communities to design their own solutions. And is that a lived experience, or is something that they're aspiring to?
Well, I mean, in my view, I think if you look at KwaZulu-Natal, I would argue that it's a lived experience to a certain extent. But I mean, KwaZulu-Natal is unique in that it is more than 70% rural. And Inkatha Freedom Party has governed in a manner that the citizens of KwaZulu-Natal have been given mostly access to land, for example, where livelihood is measured on one's ability to work the land, to survive from the land through agriculture, and owning, cattle and animals and farming. And the majority of citizens in KwaZulu-Natal really survive from that. And it's a question of then saying that some of the problems around their arrangement is services that would emerge from national government and provincial government to enable that arrangement to happen. So where Inkatha is involved, they've been able to, for instance, ensure that through the chiefdom, citizens get access to land. But the challenge has been, for instance, when you have land, do you have water to actually grow your plants? Do you have water to be able to grow food for your animals and so on, which is something that is not necessarily within the ambit of the local municipality all the time. There are challenges in terms of the linkages between local government, provincial government, and national government, where then you can't just say it is because of a result of Inkatha Freedom Party or not. You would need to look at the role of provincial government, KwaZulu-Natal, how they are making sure that people get access to electricity and water and other services that enable living on the land a better source of livelihood. So there are those dynamics. However, if you look at it from the perspective of just the role of Inkatha Freedom Party, one can argue that yes, to a certain extent, if you look at the Mangosuthu College that was established under Inkatha Freedom Party, you look at the level of housing in a rural setting, of course, something has happened, something has shifted, but it's not adequate, Thabo. I think Inkatha Freedom Party perhaps would need to just review that and see what have been some of the gaps and challenges, because even as I speak of that, we still have high levels of poverty in KwaZulu-Natal generally. And since 1994, Inkatha Freedom Party has enjoyed at least 50% vote in the 1994 elections. And we started to see the decline, right, of the voter because of dissatisfaction around the whole policy of self-reliance of Inkatha Freedom Party, not necessarily becoming a reality of the citizens of KwaZulu-Natal. As we speak now, Inkatha Freedom Party moved from 50% in 1994. As we're heading towards 2024 elections, I think they're standing at about 14% of the votership of KwaZulu-Natal as a province, mainly because of the self-reliance policy, amongst other things, that has not been realistic to people. But again, I think it's linked to all other things like we see in the country in relation to the relationship that we see between the different spheres of government. So their policies have not been tested thoroughly because of those issues that I'm raising. And I think it's difficult then to say because you have ruled in KwaZulu-Natal through this self-reliance policy, then you're able to replicate it elsewhere without necessarily having tested it in those ways. I mean, Inkatha Freedom Party only really has got a footprint in KwaZulu-Natal and some parts of Gauteng. Yeah. And in Gauteng, it's just few numbers of, because of migrant labor, people who are living in hostels and people who have migrated for labor purposes, but don't necessarily replicate that kind of livelihood as a strategy for survival in the city like Gauteng, for example, because most of them are employed or they're in the taxi industry and so on. So it's a complicated phenomena. However, in light of the glitches that we are having around social assistance in the country, and the fact that it is not enabling South Africans to survive on our own, perhaps it is something that we could explore. And I'm aware, Thabo, and viewers at home, of a majority of citizens who are saying we don't want to just live on handouts. Yes, social assistance is important to reduce destitution, to reduce different levels of destitution, but you actually also need to know that you have something sustainable for the future, so that you don't always have to go back to government and beg, but rather have government. There's a saying that says, you don't always feed someone a fish, but you teach them how to catch a fish so that they can be able to survive on their own. And I think that is what the Inkatha Freedom Party is trying to do here at Thabo. And perhaps we can give them a chance, hopefully, if they become government in 2024.
So it's not surprising, I suppose. I mean, it's always been their idea. I think it was even suggested in 1994, the devolution of government, constitutional devolution of government, to have, for example, KZN become its own kind of state there and control its policing, control its resources in terms of service delivery and so on and so forth. Is that idea gaining traction more and more now with, of course, the DA also in the Western Cape calling for the same?
Well, they have been pushing for that. The Democratic Alliance and Inkatha Freedom Party in particular have been very clear around the policies of federalism, which is that idea that services have got to be localized as much as possible, including, issues of policing. However, if you look at federal governments all over the world, you would realize that most of them have decided to say, yes, you can decentralize everything, but leave the security component to national government, mainly because of issues of national security. And I think that is probably one of the challenges that they may experience in this regard. But I think if you look at the problems around gender-based violence and femicide in the country, deep-seated murders that are happening at local level and low responses and maybe slow pace of responding from the police system, maybe Inkatha Freedom Party and the DA have got something there to say. Let us decentralize policing, but my proposal would be that separate policing from the role that is played by the National Defence Force, because you want to keep the National Defence Force at a place where it is handled by national government, should we take the route of decentralization in such a way that we have our soldiers guarding our borders, to enable that we are ready. Our intelligentsia is more sort of in the hands of national government, but have a room for local governments to do that. But I think policing in terms of just direct service delivery on a daily basis, where we monitor crimes, civil crimes in our homes, in our neighborhoods and so on, I would really probably say, let us give that a chance and see, because the type of policing that we have currently is not working for us, Thabo. We are dealing with a pandemic here in South Africa where 1 in 3 women are being raped every 3 hours. And I think if we bring police closer home, right now I can tell you it's sitting at home. If someone is being stabbed or being raped at this point as we are speaking and they're calling for an ambulance and the police to respond to that case, it takes them 3 to 5, 8 hours even a day, so worse in rural areas. So perhaps bringing the policing closer home through this idea of decentralization may assist the situation. And that is where the IFP and the DA perhaps are finding each other, comparatively to the ANC government that has led us through this concept of centralized governance that has not proven to actually speed up service delivery to the people. And I think that is a challenge in relation to what they are calling socialism. My sense is that if you are talking about, and maybe it's an ideological numbness in some kind of, or perhaps lack of analysis of it, my understanding of what the Inkatha Freedom Party is saying, it's actually talking about socialism, because if you are saying people must be self-reliant, people must live together, must be interconnected within communities, it's a form of socialism. But maybe you are just saying don't centralize that socialism, perhaps do something like what countries like your China, your Cuba, and all the socialist countries are doing, to say decentralize as much as possible, right? And I think that's the challenge I've also heard about democratic centralism, that the kind of democratic centralism that the ANC is pushing for us is dangerous, because they are not interrogating those aspects of how centralization is defeating the ends of wanting to deliver services to the people. And Inkatha Freedom Party is saying, let us decentralize even as we do socialism. So I feel like there's an ideological work that needs to happen at this policy conference of Inkatha Freedom Party to check themselves. And Thabo, I know I'm speaking a lot, but let them go back to a report that was produced by Wood. There's a gentleman who was a member of the IFP many, many years ago in the 80s who produced this report to say Inkatha Freedom Party has got the responsibility to do thinking work ideologically. What do they mean when they're saying they're not doing socialism? Because when you talk about self-reliance, that is a socialist pact. But I will stop it there. Otherwise, I'm just saying perhaps there is something to give a chance there if they give it that a thought.
Let's leave it there. Much appreciated, Dr. Fikile Vilakazi there, giving some analysis to the policy conference of the IFP.